Are you ready for your daily dose of pharmacy wisdom? Come meet your host of the Next Wave Pharmacy Podcast Network, Jeff Key, Mark Bivens, Will Tuft, Francis Nahas, and hey, I'll be there too. Join us in Orlando, Florida at NCPA at the Catalyst Pharmacy Podcast, booth 312.
What does a pharmacist do? Well, most people might answer that a pharmacist dispenses the medications that my doctor prescribes. Now, I work with a ton of great pharmacists, and one thing that I don't generally see is excitement about pills in a vial. And this is probably because pharmacists have been trained to do so much more. So what can you get excited about in your community? To find out, let's go beyond the scripts. Everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Scripts. I'm Will Tuft with Pioneer RX, and as usual, we have a fantastic guest joining us today. This is a guest that you've probably met, probably ran into in one way or another out there in the world of pharmacy. Dr. Saswat Kabisatpathy. I'm gonna hope I got it pretty close. All right, but you probably know him as Dr. Swat. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Will. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, man. So it was funny. I heard a podcast the other day. Jeff and Marcia were talking to Ashley Moose, and she just really quickly name dropped you, like in a sentence. She said, "Oh yeah, you know, Swat and his team are up to some great things over here," and I was like, "That's awesome that you know you've achieved that level of fame where it's just that first name, even a nickname, and everyone knows who she's talking about." So
maybe she was prepping for a seg. I think that's what we call a segue in the business. No, Ashley Moose and Joe and the team up there and up the way from us, they're doing awesome things, and it's an exciting time for pharmacy. It's an honor and a privilege, right, to be working with colleagues side by side like that. You know, there's a lot of great stuff that's happening, and everyone's trying to figure out ways to collaborate and help, the independent community pharmacy space and our colleagues and peers in the business. So great. I'm excited. Glad Ashley was on the podcast with you guys, and I'm sure she had a lot of exciting things to share as well. So yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, definitely want to talk about some of your work with that crew over with CPESN. Prior to that, and probably more on your day-to-day plate, you're also involved with the Avant Pharmacy group with Amina and that team out there. Tell me a little bit about how your role kind of fits in with the Avant Pharmacy side. And then, of course, there's a lot of other things going on with that group as well. But let's talk a little bit about those pharmacies and kind of where you fit into those operations.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give kind of the quick background of the pharmacy itself, right? So just like many folks, right, it started as an independent pharmacy, single store, right? So I work for Avant Pharmacy and Wellness. Many of you guys probably knew us formerly as RX Clinic Pharmacy, and that's what our owner and my boss and colleague, Dr. Amina Abubakar, she started that journey, and it was just like many folks, just a small independent community pharmacy here in Charlotte. And so over the years, as growth and innovation happened within the pharmacy setting, there are numerous opportunities that came about, right? So obviously, many folks know that we are very heavily involved in collaboration in the healthcare space. And so it started with medical providers and local medical providers in the Charlotte area, with which we've embedded clinical pharmacists and multiple practices. Obviously, the community side of it is really engaged in supporting those practices in a variety of ways. Not only just with the pharmacists that are there, but what can the community pharmacy side of what we have been doing for years really elevate its game. And so as the opportunities grew within RX Clinic Pharmacy, and then we had the rebrand in 2019, we are now in 4 locations across the greater Charlotte area. 3 of our locations are in medical practices. So we kind of have what I call our sister clinic, if you will, where we've been working with them side by side from the beginning since their inception. And our when we had the rebrand and we moved into our newest location here in Charlotte, rather than kind of embed that within the medical practice, we still wanted to keep our roots. We still wanted to be a kind of a traditional independent community pharmacy. It just happens to be that we moved into an old Rite Aid building, and there was so much space that we were like, well, let's put another another location for the medical practice. So that's our flagship location here in Charlotte. So we still have been doing the same things that Amina had envisioned from the origin of kind of building the community pharmacy. So I have to remind everyone that we still are a community pharmacy. We still do dispense medications. We are still involved in the same journeys and challenges that many other independent community pharmacies have. But with the growth, right, that Amina experienced, she realized that there are opportunities to really go from just not only just being kind of that individual community owner to really needing to develop a leadership team. So 2019, I had come on board initially kind of focusing on operations and really was serving in kind of helping develop the operations of the pharmacy. How do you align 4 locations? You know, that's a lot to begin to manage, a lot to manage. At the time we were actually getting ready to open our 3rd location. So just even in the 4 years that I've been here, we've seen that growth. So what we realized was once we got operations, you know, kind of in a place, Amina realized that there were just skill sets and talents that I had that not only could I serve the pharmacy, but the relationships I was able to develop in a very short period of time, relationships I had previously, and just kind of how to execute the vision of our leadership team and Amina's vision, that she wanted me to focus from operations more into a hybrid role of strategy, operations, and implementation. So I went from going into operations into strategy. So that's why my title, I use that air quotes loosely, my title with the pharmacy is Chief Strategic Officer, but it's really, it's the dream job that I never thought was possible just because of the climate and landscape and what you learn coming out of pharmacy school. You don't realize that these opportunities exist in these types of locales. And so to be in my dream job, working on strategy and innovation is really cool. And my day-to-day really, it's funny, I actually just got asked this question by a bunch of pharmacy students that I did a session with earlier this week. I went to the Medical University of South Carolina for pharmacy school in Charleston, South Carolina. And they have a class where they have students actually reach out to alumni to hear about the cool things that they were doing. So I got asked the same question. They were like, what's your day-to-day like? And I'm like,
it depends on the day.
Yeah. I don't have a standard day-to-day. You know, the standard 9 to 5 doesn't exist in my world. It's really, you know, what are the opportunities that are there? A lot of it recently, I will say, has been a lot of project management and project engagement. And I know you and I talked previously about kind of really diving into that later in the show. But it really has been a lot of kind of how do we take the opportunities for strategy, whether that's strategies that are within the community pharmacy setting and like what our teams are executing on, and evaluating that, implementing and evaluating to ensure that we've got sustainable and profitable business models, right? Because Amina, as many folks that know Amina, she has a lot of great ideas, but if we're not able to implement one, and then 2, strategically ensure that we're evaluating successfully, you could be working on a project or you could be working on a plan or a program or whatever it is. And, you know, 1 month in, 3 months in, 6 months in, 12 months in, 2 years in, what are the milestones that you should be hitting and what is it that you're accomplishing? And if those programs and projects don't have focus, right, as a visionary, you're always at the head of the table. You're always trying to get ahead of the curve for what the opportunities and the challenges might be. but it's the implementers, the operators that really help, execute on that vision. And so I'm one of our team members that really helps support Amina in that role. And it's probably hands down like the coolest job. I've done a lot of other things prior to pharmacy, but this is by far the coolest job I've ever had, hands down. So
Yeah, so you've definitely got a lot to strategically organize and keep moving. But I think you kind of touched on something so important right there, is that those visionaries, the people who get really excited about starting those new ideas and pushing these boundaries, a lot of times are the people who maybe lose that focus when the next shiny thing comes, and so having that support to make sure that you have that same follow through, 6 months from now, is really important. But it's really easy to kind of overlook that if you're not delegating, if you don't have that support team. And I think that's one of the things that I noticed when I visited the original RX Clinic Pharmacy. That was probably in 15 or 16. It was way back. But I noticed, Amina had an area in the back with like all of these different lists and policies and procedures, and everything was built into a system so that tomorrow it's not going to be something you did yesterday. It's the thing that we do every day. We follow the system, and it's a standard instead of a something that you lose interest in or lose focus on, or let that flame burn out. So you definitely have to have that intentionality if you want that to be ongoing.
yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. I think for a lot of pharmacy owners, when you're looking to see how to innovate or grow, right, one of the biggest challenges is you have to figure out how to go from ownership centric to kind of company or CEO centric, right? And so the idea becomes whether you have, it's just you and a technician to start out with, or as you're looking to see how to grow and expand, it's how do you lay the blueprint or the foundation for your company to be able to get to that growth mode, right? In the beginning, for a lot of pharmacy owners, and I've actually talked to a few pharmacy owners recently that have acquired, new pharmacies, and they're acquiring pharmacies that are new to them but have been in business for a while. And they're seeing, well, what are the opportunities to grow and thrive in this model and what we're trying to do? Because we all know the model has changed entirely for independent pharmacies. And so it's going from, we can't be tied to that product anymore. We can't just be focusing on dispensing, but how do we position ourselves to grow, right? And that actually is a very hard thing to do. A lot of people like to, talk about a lot of the opportunities with growth, that there are a lot of resources out there. But when you're in the thick of it, right? Like when you're trying to make that happen, it's hard because especially as an owner, right? You're the owner, you're also HR, you're also operations, and so it's difficult at a lot of times, I think, for folks to see what that pathway is, and it's not easy. So I always applaud the team, because Amina has been doing this a lot longer than I've been there. And I always applaud the team for what they did and the steps that she took to kind of get there. So as you were mentioning, kind of like the books and the policies and the procedures in the back, right? It's a difficult thing to do where you're trying to establish that structure or the infrastructure for growth, but it's hard. It's not easy. There's a lot of tears, a lot of growing pains, but I tell Amina, I said, look at where you are today, and a lot of what we do, a lot of the opportunities, we wouldn't have them if she wasn't willing to take a risk. And it is, at the end of the day, it is always a risk, right? You can everyone finds comfort in kind of doing the same thing day in, day out. And pharmacists, we're A-type personality folks. We like order, structure, routine, right? That's why we love Pioneer, because it's A lot of step A to B to C to D that you can implement, right, in what we have, and to have that operation system, to have that process be very straightforward in a lot of ways and simple to use is great. But the creativity that now comes about that, right, and what we can do, it's helped us tremendously in even our own growth, right? And so I think that's the key, is finding the resources, whether that's technology, whether it's people, whether it's financial, whatever it might be, to help position yourself for growth. Because if we aren't growing, then we're dying,
Yeah. And, change is hard, but I think for pharmacy especially, the last few years have really highlighted that complacency is even harder. So, I think it was probably, it has to be almost 10 years ago now, when, I first met Amina, and one of the things that she told me that I thought was really cool in an interview way back then was that, when a prescription comes in the door, that kind of opens the door for all of these other opportunities to serve that patient and grow your business. And it's a great win-win situation where if a patient says, they bring in a prescription for, a chronic condition, then what products can you offer? What therapies, what knowledge can you share to help that patient with the condition and not just the symptoms? And back then, there was still some sustainability with, prescription volume as a pharmacy. And, I feel like now that's just kind of commonplace. You have to be doing that because the prescription remits just aren't really cutting it. So, it's interesting to see how that's changed from being very forward thinking to, a necessity for survival in the past few years.
Yeah. I mean, we look at it every time, like you said, every time a patient comes through the door, right? Usually it's hey, I'm here to pick up my prescription, right? It's not, especially 10 years ago, it wasn't, hey, I'm in here for a service, right? It was, hey, I'm here to pick up my prescription. Now, just seeing the evolution of pharmacies in general, I think COVID really highlighted a lot of that, right? To show the general population that, hey, yes, you can get your vaccine here, you can get tested here, you can get treated here, right? There was a spotlight that happened on community pharmacy. One of the things I feel like is that was great. I just wish we had shined a brighter light on that opportunity, because so many pharmacies have done so many great things in that space. And I do think that did open it up to the general public to say, oh, I didn't know my local pharmacy could do X, Y, and Z. And I think now people are coming to the door and saying, hey, can I get my flu shot this year, right? Can I get that? Because there are challenges in the primary care space as well. We know this because we work with them every day and we see the challenges, we see how busy they are. And so to be able to be that community kind of health center, that community hub spot where a patient comes in and it's, hey, I'm here for this, but what are all the other things that are going on, right? I think that conversation and that dialogue is happening more and more, but in typical pharmacy fashion, we are our own worst enemies because we are some of the worst marketers on the face of the planet. Now, that's not to say that there are great pharmacy owners that do a great job with that, but it is probably, I think, in a lot of ways, one of our weakest areas is that how do we market, how do we promote ourselves? Because that's not inherent to our DNA in a lot of ways, is that self-promotion, self-marketing, because we are inherently naturally geared towards taking care of patients, and that's where a lot of our focus is. But like you said, Will, when that patient comes in, it's always, how do you optimize that patient, right? How do you optimize the opportunity with that patient? That's a message that we kind of preach to our teams a lot of times, is what are we doing? Because it's, we're not looking at growing volume by trying to get 500 more people into the pharmacy and grow it that. If we do, that's great. But what is it that we're doing right now with our current patient load and with the patients that are in our system, with the patients that we have that are walking into the door, with the clinic that's beside us? How are we promoting, marketing, advertising, not only the services that we have, but what are the things that those patients need when they come through these doors that we can really help support that goes beyond, hey, I'd like to pick up my prescription today. Is it ready? Right. How do you have the deeper conversation with that patient?
Yeah, I think that's one of the metrics that I've seen kind of change in importance the most. I spent years on the installation team. And when you're going out to a pharmacy, that was like one of the measures of how successful or big or difficult or challenging, is the pharmacy, is daily script count. This pharmacy does 1,500 scripts a day. That is a measure of success. Well, like if you're not making, if you're losing money on prescription filling, maybe 1,500 scripts a day is not the best measure of success always. It's how are you serving those patients and finding that win-win, and really practicing at the top of your license. So, I don't think Avant Pharmacy or RX Clinic Pharmacy has ever kind of been geared towards a script count as a measure of success. Are you looking at conversions or, strategically, how are you gauging how you're doing then?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, obviously our team has various KPIs that we look at. And so because we've integrated, clinical services into a lot of what we do and a lot of the service sets that we do, and part of why we had the name change as well was our focus into not just prescriptions and support with patients on that side and the pharmacy services, but we really focused on wellness, right? We were going beyond just the script count. We were going beyond just the traditional core services of vaccines and things like that, and saying, well, what are the other things that we can do? And so part of the brand image and the name image of why we went to Avant Pharmacy and wellness was we had pharmacists who were passionate about the health and wellness side of the patients. And so now you're looking at what is the holistic totality of that patient. So, look, you hit the nail on the head early, just a minute ago, with discussing the economics, right? 1,500 scripts a day, 10 years ago, 15 years ago might have been sustainable, but with DIR and everything else that pharmacies are under the gun with what PBMs are doing, the economics, right, have changed entirely. So now, when you're losing on a patient, right, and every time you fill that lisinopril, you're losing $2 or whatever, right? Okay, yeah, that's not good, and you don't want to lose on that patient. But what are the other things that you could do? Is that patient a patient that's enrolled in our CCM program? Is that patient enrolled in our wellness program? Is that patient that's coming in actually enrolled in our health game plan program or PPC at home through CPSN, right? What are the other offerings that we have that really, that $2 is kind of, if you look at it as a cost of acquisition of that patient to maintain them in your system? Because the reality of it is that if we don't figure out how to support our patients in a way that they are going to sustain being in our business, the other competitors are out there and they're offering all kinds of carrots, and they're actually looking to try to get into the patient's homes now too, right? I can't remember when it was, but a few months back, right, there was it seemed like there were a run on acquisitions of like home health systems, home health enterprises, home health companies, because the PBMs and the insurance companies are like, well, how can we get to the patient even earlier in the process, right? I'm sure if there was a way to figure out how to tag them at birth, they would be in the hospitals with a CVS welcome packet or something. But I think the reality of it is that like they are trying to strategically position themselves to get to the patients at home. So now, right, and if they're doing that and they're now getting, we've seen more impact or more interest in these our competitors getting into delivery, right? Well, independent pharmacies have been delivering for the longest time. That's been a staple of what we've done to help ensure an extra level of care, if you will, to patients. But even in that process and the opportunity there, if we're not maximizing on that patient when we're delivering to that patient, right? What would make our delivery service any different from a CVS delivery person, right? So now you have to elevate the game. You have to elevate the business model to say, okay, what are the other things that we're doing? And I think that's where I'm always amazed by what are the cool things that we do and what are the cool opportunities that are there, because through our collaboration with CPSN, we were able to kind of bring in some new opportunities to independent community pharmacies.
Yeah, and I think that's really key is that, most independent pharmacists aren't the best marketers because they're, come from that service mindset, that servant mindset where, they're there to serve their patients and uh sometimes the profitability conversations take a back seat to that. So for years, pharmacies offer these delivery services and they're doing those for free and running AR with, at no cost to the patient and just bending over backwards and doing all of these great things and not getting paid for them. And then trying to add more and add more and add more. And that's what's been really interesting about watching the Avant group and the CPESN group is to find ways that you can monetize a lot of those services and quantify the value and the impact that you're having. So how have you kind of seen that come about? What were some of the, early successes where you were able to find something that, wow, this would be really cool if we could spend more time with the patient at home? Okay, so how do you fund that? Do you have like an early success you can remember where it's, okay, this is going to work?
Well, so I'll tell you this much, right? So I think one of the things that's been exciting is that we see, I'm going to try to stay on topic here because this actually gave me 3 ideas of things we could talk about here. The first is that, right, when pharmacy has been delivering for a long time, and I think that the opportunities to engage that patient at home has always been a positive. But I think it's just been very transactional, right? Here are your medications. Is there anything else that we can support you with? Thank you. Have a good day. Right. But a lot of times, right, it's that patient also needing OTC meds or whatever. So it's been very transactional. Right. But I remember Amina telling me a story of our team going to a patient's home to deliver, and they were concerned because the patient, I think that, they hadn't heard from in a while or whatever. And they went into the patient's home to kind of, to deliver the medicines. They were, obviously the patient invited them in, and they realized that the patient themselves were struggling with what medicines they should be taking. They actually had all their medicines laid out. And I remember that it was, I think a pharmacist was either there or brought in to help that patient. So it's those minute interactions of opportunities that if you weren't doing those things, you wouldn't get, or if you didn't have your folks trained, you wouldn't receive, right? Doing safety checks with patients to make sure that, if it's an elderly patient that is high risk for falls, right? That you have trained your team to be able to look out. Do they have, rails? Do they have furniture where there are rugs out there and the rugs aren't laying flat, things like that. And that's what's really exciting is I think there's this concept, we've been throwing around a lot of these terms in a lot of ways, but what's really been a key buzzword that I think is really where pharmacy fits in is social determinants of health. I'm sure you've had other people talk about it's been a big thing in the profession recently, a big buzzword, but it really is. It's really an integral part to how we're going to evolve how we care for patients, because pharmacy has been dealing with social determinants of health for the longest time. It just hasn't been actionized in a way that has created the buzz that it has. So I'm really excited for what that space is evolving into, because we can talk about taking care of diabetes and managing a patient diabetes and throwing med after med after med all day long. But it does us no good if that patient doesn't have the resources to acquire that medication. They don't have the transportation to get to the pharmacy. And even if you deliver, that they don't have the food that they need to take to help support them if they're taking that medication, because they shouldn't take it on an empty stomach, right? Or that they don't have the resources they need to learn about that medication, right? So, I'm talking about transportation. I'm talking about food insecurities. I shouldn't say ironically, sadly, one of the major social determinants of health among elderly patients is loneliness, right? And so what that leads to mental health challenges and being able to have services to support patients for their mental health, right? How do we do that with the opportunities that we have? And so I'm probably putting a shameless plug here for another CPSN special purpose network that's out there. But community health workers and what Trip Logan's team and what Jake Aldo and them are doing with CPSN Health Equity, they're looking to train independent community pharmacy team members to be community health workers with payer opportunities that are there. So payers are seeing the value of engaging in these types of service sets because they're addressing the needs of the care gaps that exist in our already fragmented healthcare system, right? So now you take these opportunities that pharmacies have actually been solving for a really long time. We just didn't have a fancy terminology to put that in. And now you're wrapping it around, a payer, like, for example, I mean, we know Medicare is a national payer. So, and you have all the plans that are there for Medicare, but you have those patients that are typically your highest risk patients for these challenges and these issues. So now you have a model with which you can see how can we collaborate with local providers, with health departments, with whoever to kind of do these things. And so for us, the excitement has been, we've been working on this in the primary care space for quite a while, as you kind of alluded to, and what we've done in collaboration with primary care docs. And, the Institute has been teaching and training folks on how to engage with primary care providers, but and other individuals as well. But what was interesting was when we talked to our own primary care, they're just so busy. I mean, I think you can probably talk to many patients that it's taking 3 months to get into a doctor's office, right? There's just a shortage of primary care in the U.S., to support the population. And as we have a growing elderly patient population, I think I've presented previously that like by 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. So the baby boomer generation is getting to this phase of we're going to have a lot of Americans that are over the age of 65 that need care. So you see our competitors getting into this space. They're acquiring home health. They're acquiring long-term care facilities. So there was a lot of curiosity. How do we do? What do we do? How do we do? So about 2 years ago, I think 2 years now at this point, we were introduced to a group of specialists known as physiatrists. So I'm not saying psychiatrist. I'm not saying psychologist. I'm not saying
podiatrist.
Or podiatrist, yeah, physiatrist. And yeah, my eyebrows were physiatrist. I kept thinking that someone was just stuttering or having they were missaying the word. And I said, okay, physiatrist, what is he talking about? What is physiatry? And wow, that really opened my eyes up to a whole realm of specialty care that I didn't realize. So these physiatrists are known as physical medicine and rehabilitation physicians. So they are MDs, they are residency trained. So but where you typically find them is in skilled nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, rehabilitation centers, and VA centers and things of that nature, where they're working on the physical medicine, the physical rehabilitation of patients who have gone through some type of trauma or chronic disease, if you will, that has been debilitating. And so I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And then my second question was, that's really cool, but what do they need us for? Why would they want to collaborate with us, right? Well, it turns out that a lot of these patients, when they go into the facilities and they go into care, right, primary care are working with these facilities to help support their patients. But the ongoing care that's needed, it's difficult for them to support those patients, right? Because there's just so many patients that are in need. So physiatrists help support those patients, and they kind of augment the care to get them through to where they transition, whether they're transitioning back to their home or transitioning to loved ones, whatever it might be, caregiver. Well, then what happens? There's a gap in care because the patients aren't being followed when they get to the home, right? They may be for a short period of time, whether they're doing home rehab or whatever it might be, but then there's no continuity of care. So the patients fall through the cracks. And so the PM&R docs or the physiatrists were like, we would love to see if there was a way that we could create a model of care that creates continuity with these patients so that we can see them through to them getting better. And, you're not going to focus on diabetes when a patient has cognitive decline, right? I mean, you're going to try to do both, but you can't just focus on that, right? You can't focus on a patient when they're continuing to be frail, when they're continuing to have increased mobility issues, right? The things that create those activities of daily living that you want, and everybody, we all want to be independent. Nobody ever wants to be in a caregiver's care, right? So how could we support that process? And it just was like light bulb moments, right? Well, how have you ever heard of what community pharmacy does? Have you seen what independent community pharmacies are doing for these patients? Because we were already working with these patients, right? Caregiver comes, needs bubble packing for that patient. Caregiver comes, they need DME supplies for that patient. Caregiver comes, they're trying to get education on medications that the patient is taking, or the patient themselves are coming to the pharmacy when they can to get the information and education that they need. And we're at the bridge between their primary care visits, but also what happens if there isn't continuity of care, the patients fall through the cracks. They're now rehospitalized, which also penalizes everyone in the new value-based models, right? And so you're kind of in this like unfortunate cycle of being stuck. So when we introduce the concept of engaging community pharmacies to support these patients and not support the patients in what pharmacies traditionally are already doing, we are already helping them with their blood pressure medicines. We're already helping them, with diabetes. We're helping them with hypercholesteremia, right? So we're helping the patients in the disease states that they have. But is anyone focusing on the things that really truly matter to those patients, right? Are we focusing on social determinants of health? Are we focusing on mobility? Can that patient just be able to get up and have a bowl of cereal, So when you change that focus and see that community pharmacies could really help those patients in that way, Physiatry Pharmacy, we had that aha moment. And out of that is what came the collaboration with CPSN and the Physiatry Pharmacist Collaborative at Home. So we call it PPC at Home for short. And so what we're doing is we're working within different settings, whether it's skilled nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, whether it's trying to meet the patient at home, whether it's patients that we have that are coming into our pharmacy that we know are on a cane or a walker, or that we have given a cognitive view screening to before and have noticed decline in their cognitive function, or in just inherently a patient's family member telling us that, Miss Granny Smith is, she just doesn't seem to be, with it the way that she was before. And so now taking those patients and saying, hey, can we bring them into this program where we're supporting their care in this way that we've been doing within the primary care space, and now leveraging chronic care management, remote patient monitoring, behavioral health integration, doing those non-face-to-face services, but now having a collaborator, a provider, right? A medical provider that believes and has shown that that extensive level of care for these patients improves the patient outcomes, right? And so we've been doing this for a little while now and kind of piloting this in our own pharmacy. And now we've just recently expanded to 4 other states and are piloting in those states. So it's an exciting time for us from the perspective of really kind of getting this model going, trying to figure out how to make it work, trying to figure out how we can really elevate the level of care for these patients, because they're the ones that are falling through the cracks, right? And so we're having to take a reactive and proactive approach, right? We're having to address the issues of the patients that they currently have. So the reactive, how do we address those patients' needs and make sure that they don't get worse? But then how do we identify those patients that are on the cusp, right? Mrs. Smith that comes into the pharmacy, she may be, approaching her 60s. How do we figure out opportunities to kind of build them into our wellness program? And then when they are 65, engage them in health game plan to ensure that we have preventative opportunities in place for them? Or are we seeing cognitive decline that we can catch earlier? It's just really exciting to see what our team is doing in the space, trying to see how we're identifying patients. And I was going to give, another shout out to Pioneer. I actually had a call earlier this week with our team where they're running reports to identify patients in our system to say, okay, here are the categories of meds that we need to look at. Are they on a nebulizer? Are they high-risk fall medications, right? Things that we can tag into the system now, right? All the patients that within the DME that we've sold, how many patients are on a walker or a cane that we could potentially reach out to evaluate and see if they're good for the program. So it was really great. I saw in our meeting earlier this week the reports that had been run, and we right off the bat, without having even kind of evaluated as a whole, our pharmacist Jack said, I think we have 47 patients that we could enroll today. And I'm like, oh, crap.
You have so much data. Yeah, there's so much data there identifying those opportunities.
I'm like, can we just start with 5? Let's start with 5. But it was, it was exciting. He was excited. He was like, whoa, I didn't realize that, by parsing the data, right, that's in our own system. So when we're talking about this program and we're talking about, going beyond dispensing, right, going beyond the script as the podcast alludes to, what are the opportunities within our own systems that we can run these reports, we can evaluate our own data that is so powerful, so meaningful, and that it has even greater meaning because we know those patients, right? We know the folks that are coming through the door. So when we read a report, it's not just, a faceless name that we're trying to apply a generic standard of we're going to do X, Y, and Z. It's customized care to meet those patients' needs, right? To get them to where they need to be. And so that's what's really exciting about this is we have this program that we've been working on and that we're hoping to launch with pharmacies across the country, to where whether that patient, we meet them at their home, whether that patient is coming in and we can get them on our digital or our mobile tablet. So we have a tablet that's kind of in kiosk mode in one of our wellness rooms where patient can come in. And if we identify them and we feel they have a need, or if they're available, and we can get the referral from the provider. Because remember, a lot of our patients that are coming through are patients that are right next door. So we can refer them pretty quickly into the program, and they can be seen same day by our physiatrist to be able to get a care plan, or what we call a game plan, in place to make sure that patient doesn't get worse, or that there's a plan in place to evaluate fall risk, to evaluate mobility, to evaluate cognitive decline for that patient. And by taking care of these patients in a more holistic approach, their A1Cs are going to get better. They're, going to have better adherence and compliance with their medications, because now they're less worried about falling. They're doing exercises to improve their memory. We're getting them to walk 5,000 steps a day, right? We're getting them on a teletrainer, and the problem that we see a lot of times, Will, with a lot of these patients is it's accountability. I'm not telling anybody here anything that these patients haven't already heard. I am not spitting new knowledge that you need to exercise as an elderly patient, right?
Well, it just makes sense if you think about it. You have a patient who's struggling to the point that they end up hospitalized, and you put them in this really great environment where their diet is accounted for, their medications are administered, their standing orders for all of the things they should be doing, right? And then once they're nursed back to health, you release them back into the environment that brought them there with no, additional care. And on top of that, there's, the challenges of transition of care that are introduced into the original scenario. So it gets really complex. And as a payer, you got to say, man, there's got to be a more economical way to help this patient than to nurse them back to health and then, send them back home. So a payer must see the value in that kind of preventative and ongoing care. But I think part of the problem historically has been quantifying your services and billing. So, how have you seen that actually work in the pharmacy space with Avant or with the CPESN groups?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great question, right? So the question always becomes for pharmacy, right? This program is great. These concepts are great, but how do we get paid, right? Because we're already dispensing for free or at a loss, right? And we're not getting paid for those services that we're providing from a product standpoint. So if we're going to engage in other services, how do we do it? So just like with everything else, what we focus on Medicare patients first and foremost. And the hope is that when you build a program or you build a model, if you can show that it's successful with that patient population, other payers will follow eventually, right? So kind of the long-term vision and goal and hope is that we build a sustainable model for addressing the needs of these high-risk patients. Because the fact of the matter is that we're looking at, I call it the 80-20 rule. I believe that if you kind of look at a small patient population in a practice or whatever it is, that 20% of patients are actually consuming 80% of the resources, right? So when providers talk about, oh, I was just on the phone with Granny Smith for 45 minutes, right? Addressing X, Y, and Z, but she came into a visit where I only had 7 minutes with her before, right? Providers are busy. They don't have the time, the support, the capacity to be able to spend that time with that patient, unfortunately. But if we get Granny Smith into this program where they have that totality of care, where we're touching base with that patient on a regular basis, right? Couple minutes a week, leveraging the service sets that we have, then it's a completely different way of engaging that patient, number one. Number two, we know that Medicare pays for these service sets. We've been doing this in the primary case space for a long time. So from the billing standpoint of what we're doing, because we brought physiatry on board, we brought the collaborator in. So we're not having to search for a collaborator that's in the community. We're bringing that community to you. And because our services are being done via telehealth, right, that's another layer of added value. The patients are beaming in to communicate with those providers. They don't have to actually have them, in that pharmacy. Now, down the road, I can see that, with the other service sets that CPSN is offering with direct primary care model and other things that are there with their big tree services and things like that, we have pharmacies that are engaging in both models. So now, how do we work with that nurse practitioner that's in your practice to now also engage in this model as well? So now Granny Smith can come into the pharmacy and actually be seen by a nurse practitioner who's working both in the DPC model and in the PPC model. So it's really exciting to see these opportunities and what we're trying to do. I mean, I'll be honest, we're still in our infancy in a lot of ways to try to figure out a lot of the pieces, because we're bringing more complexity to what we've done previously. But the exciting thing is now this is happening in our pharmacies. Our pharmacies are truly turning into healthcare hubs, right? They're truly engaging patients in ways that patients may not have seen before. So now, whether we're delivering to that patient and delivering this type of care to the patient at home, whether they're coming into the pharmacy to beam in and see that patient, they're now in our ecosystem. They're not going to another ecosystem, right? They're in our healthcare ecosystem. And whether that patient then becomes a patient that's in a skilled nursing facility or assisted living facility, now we can reach them there because we have the resources, the specialists that are used to being in those facilities, knowing what needs to be done for those patients to help improve their care. And it's not just some random pharmacy out in Arizona that's calling Mrs. Smith on the phone. It's Jim's Pharmacy down the road, or it's Moose Pharmacy down the road, or it's Avant Pharmacy down the road, right? That's being able to come in and do this and really do this in this way. And the care is being delivered locally. That's really been something that has been coming from where I came from previously and now being with Avant for the last 4 years. I wholeheartedly believe in this mantra that healthcare has to be delivered locally. We have to empower our local independent community pharmacies to be able to deliver care locally, because the impact, the experience that patient has is so personalized, it's so customized, and those community pharmacies know the resources in the area. If I'm a call center doing CCM for a patient, I don't know what resources are there to help solve some of these social determinants of health crisis. But if Tyson's Pharmacy in Mississippi, rural Mississippi, is here doing these service sets, right, and engaging these patients locally and knows what the local food bank has to offer, or even has a direct connection to that local food bank, or knows the transportation services that are available, or has the staff that can actually work with that patient to address loneliness, as I described before, through this, it's a completely different way of delivering these codes and delivering these programs, because The codes are the codes, and they're a means of currency at the end of the day for pharmacy to be able to do
Sure.
business. But what's the value we're bringing to the code, right? And that, to me, is where these programs and what CPSN is doing to change the game. It's not just about, hey, we're delivering a service. It's what's the value we're bringing to that service, right? Because we're going to have competitors in the market. It's only a matter of time. We know that there's Walmart Health, right? There's CVS Health Hub coming. All of the big retails are getting into primary care. Well, why? Why are they getting there, right? It's because it's a race to acquisition of lives. At the end of the day, how do you get those patients in your healthcare ecosystem? And so we were talking about it earlier about like the messaging to pharmacy, or what are things that action items that I would tell, that we want pharmacies to get engaged with. It's, you got to know what's happening in the space. You got to know what's happening in your community, and you got to know what that impact is to you, and what are you doing as an independent community pharmacy to ensure that those patients are staying in your ecosystem. We're not going to be able to solve the PBM issues overnight, right? But what I can tell you is that these bigger entities overnight can create these big home health services, these services to get to the patient. So what are you doing as an independent community pharmacy to help keep these patients that you've had for years in your ecosystem? So we have to create new models of care. We have to meet the patient at home. We have to address the needs of that patient, because when we're doing that, and we do it well, that's the thing. I think the one thing that our significant advantage in this space, independent community pharmacies really do elevate the level of care that they bring to patients. And we do that well because, like you said, Will, earlier too, we do it to a fault, right? We do it to where we're losing money. But now, if we have a program, if we have these opportunities, and I'm not just talking about what we do with PPC at home, but what are all the other offerings that CPSN has to engage those patients, or what are other programs that are out there to engage those patients to where they are in your healthcare ecosystem and that you are protecting them. You're building a moat around each one of these patients, that they're not going to jump ship. Or when the insurance company says you have to go do this, they're informed and educated enough to say, no, I don't actually have to do this.
Yeah.
The same set of services are being provided by my independent community pharmacy down the road.
And what's interesting is, these are all like new kind of opportunities for a very traditional industry of independent pharmacy. But what allows that to grow successfully are those deep roots of that community pharmacy, where no one else can come in and fill that, because they don't have that same footing, and you can't fake that. You can't buy it. It's organic, and I think that puts independent pharmacy at a very unique position to fill those needs in the future. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Scripts, presented by the Catalyst Pharmacy Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please support our channel by liking, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell so that you'll be notified anytime we post new content. To stay up to date with all of the latest independent pharmacy news and content, follow Pioneer RX on your preferred social media platform.